All right, guys. So this is our third performance meetup get together. Um, just want to remind everybody we're recording this just so we can have it and we can share it and do some different things. So just kind of we'll always protect what everybody says and everything, but just try to keep it so that we can share it with other people and we can reference back to it. Um, we'll start off with just little reminders. We're trying to create a little learning community here, so it's open engagement. We're after one mission, and that's get better. We'll take a second. I want to continue the idea of defining things. We're going to look at jargon today, and then we're going to pass it over to Jake, and then Jake is going to run the rest of the show here today. 2 weeks ago, we defined performance. That was like execution, completing tasks. We brought up winning, but we brought up that wasn't necessarily the end product per se, but maybe part of it potentially. And then we started thinking about like elite performance. Some of us just in individual conversations, and the idea of consistency came up. Today, I want to move on to an idea called, or the word jargon, like coaching jargon. You can kind of look at a lot of different things, but there was a paper out recently that looks at the conspicuous nature that exists around jargon. So what they did, this group looked at people in academics and business in a lot of different areas, and what they found was people of sometimes lower rank use jargon the most. Okay, so they define jargon as special words, expressions that are used in a particular profession or a group that are difficult for all people to understand that are outside that group. So I brought that up as part of our language and just thinking about how we communicate as coaches, because sometimes as coaches and for like people like us in sports science, there's some technical knowledge, there's some technical words, but we got to really always think about like the end user. The end user is the athlete, and us as teachers. So like there's a time and a place for things, and having our jargon within our individual groups and our individual subdisciplines, but sometimes simpler is better. So just always thinking about who the end user is, that being the athlete, for us, that being different coaches potentially. Just always thinking about the language that we're using. Two additional resources that we'll throw out there too is Nick Winkelman's book on the right. It's called The Language of Coaching. He talks a lot about some of this, but he also talks about feedback, talks about teaching essentially, and breaking down athletic skills and how to change behavior with that. And then on the left, Brett Bartholomew and his Conscious Coaching book is a good resource for that. But don't want to take too much time with this. I'm going to pass it over to Jake, and just kind of a little intro as we go here. Jake is the Director of Operations and Athlete and Player Development over at Penn State Baseball, and got to meet Jake last year when I got here, and have been super impressed and definitely look up to him. So he was definitely somebody that we wanted to have on. And Jake, I just shared, you're the co-host. You are free to go, brother. Thank you.
Cool. All right, I'll set up share my screen here first, but appreciate the kind words, Nelly. And let me get this set up for you guys real quick. Should be good. Can you guys all see that? Awesome. So pretty much what I want to share with you guys all today, again, kind of with the vibe that we've put forward through the last couple of these, is it's going to be a little bit more informal, but my overall goal is to kind of just talk about some of the systems that we've put in place over at baseball using data to help develop some of our student athletes. I'm going to be talking about kind of the importance that I view data plays a role in that, achieving our athletes' goals, going through some of the examples of what we've done, and then also kind of the learning curve associated with that, because it does take some time to understand and implement different systems. And my goal from all of that is to share kind of what we do from a broad perspective to hopefully inspire some new thoughts and different things that you guys can maybe take to your sport or whatever you may be doing. So as an introduction to, like Nelly said, I work over with the baseball team. I'm the Director of Baseball Operations and Player Development. I wanted to include a picture because that was back when I could get a regular haircut. But my background really is I spent time working as an undergrad at the University of Iowa, the baseball team, really just focusing on basically data-driven development. From there, I got a job working in professional baseball with both the Twins and the Orioles organizations. So moving on to what does data mean to me? For me, data is a tool that can be used to help athletes reach their full potential. And you can see kind of on the screen here, in baseball especially, there's so much information that is spit out consistently after every event that we do, whether that's in practice or in games, that we have to decode into something useful. And for me, being able to use this data kind of helps us take away the guesswork as coaches in order to try and get our athletes from point A to point B. An example I use all the time is talking about using data is kind of like being able to use a calculator in a math exam. If you're doing a math exam, most likely you can write it out and you'll get to the right answer eventually. But being able to use a calculator helps you get there quicker. So for us, we have good coaches, we have good players, and being able to lean on this data, I guess taking a step back, having the good coaches and good players, we're going to be able to get them better over the course of their college career. But being able to lean on data will help provide us some direction to try and get from point A to point B as efficiently as we can. And one thing I'm going to touch on here too is I'm going to talk a lot about numbers during the entirety of this kind of presentation, but data also isn't the end all be all. Like, we're still working with athletes, we're still working with people, and that's something to keep in mind as I kind of go through all of this stuff. So to start out with, going to actually include a little bit of lingo here is talking about key performance indicators. This is something that you may be familiar with and is used in the business world, is used in the weight room, a lot of different places, and I'm sure you may use it already with whatever sport you're involved with. And pretty much what this is just kind of tracking a goal over time. And one thing that comes to mind here is the test-retest model. That's something that a lot of you are probably familiar with as an example of working in the weight room. When athletes come in, they pre-test their strength on their max reps or weight for whatever exercises. You go through some amount of training, and then you measure at the end to see if you've improved or not. And that's kind of a way that you can use data that isn't necessarily just using all of the new technology, but it helps us determine as coaches what certain athletes may need to work on, helps us track their progress over time, and then hopefully achieving those athletes' goals as we go through those processes. And the last bullet point here is one that I think is incredibly important, sometimes overlooked, is being able to have different indicators and tracking this information over time can also help us get better as coaches. Because if we have an athlete who comes in who we deem has a deficiency in whatever area X, Y, and Z, we put them through some training that we've used in the past to assist in that. We can then at the end track and see if that athlete's improved. We then know that that training that we did is either it does work or it doesn't work. And being able to have that in our toolbox to bring to the next athlete who may have similar attributes, I think is incredibly beneficial as well. Diving into a little bit of the way that we use data over at the baseball team. For me, I'm the director of operations, so I'm not the one who's out there coaching the athletes all the time. Like, I'm not allowed to be coaching the athletes at all. So being able to kind of implement some different systems to promote what the coaches are already valuing is something that I've been able to do with the information that we have available to us. So talking about some of our coaches' goals, maybe our coaches' goals are being able to control the zone. So we want our hitters to swing at more strikes and take more balls because we think that has a positive effect on us winning more games. Well, being able to use data to reinforce that, we put together a little chart here that just basically shows here are the athletes from this game, from this series, from this month, from the season, their career, whatever it may be, that kind of puts together like, all right, it's just a fun point system where they get rewarded for good actions at the plate and they get penalized for negative actions at the plate. On the far side here, you can see kind of the totals from that day. And obviously green means good, red means bad. And being able to track that over time helps kind of reinforce the importance of what we talked about with our coaches' goals. If we want them to control the zone, one, we can evaluate and see who's actually good and bad at that over time. but two, it also promotes kind of good behavior and being able to actually hand the athletes different reports like this where they can evaluate themselves and get comfortable with this. And I mean, kind of work on themselves based on the objective feedback we're providing them. Another example is another goal of ours is to hit the ball hard. And that's as simple as putting together a little leaderboard where it's, all right, our guys want to be on the top of that leaderboard. Our guys want to be on this leaderboard as many times as possible. And being able to track that over time is just another fun thing to reiterate the importance that some of our goals have on our team's success. Diving into kind of using a lot of different types of technology as well, because we have so much data available to us. And I don't know exactly what your situations are in the different areas you guys are in, but for us, we have a lot of information. So we want to make sure that we're personalizing our different player development plans to each person. And that doesn't necessarily mean creating an individual report for every single guy on your team. For us, we created something that we're going to print out every day, and just some areas of that report may mean more to some guys, and some guys may be focused on different things. For example, this area on the right this is our post-action pitching report, and it basically is showing a whole ton of different indicators that we think are important in success. This area that I've highlighted in the red box there is just talking about the different ways that pitches move, and one athlete may be working more on this, while as on the back side of that report, one athlete may be more familiar with this area, which is basically talking about where the athlete's releasing the ball in space. And basically what I'm trying to get at there is we put together a report and—
Sorry, I missed that. Could you—
Apparently I started Siri there. Sorry about that. But the idea around this is we create a report that athletes are able to get comfortable with and seeing quite frequently. And although it may not be directly personalized to their needs, each guy kind of knows exactly what's important to them. And going off of that, something that our pitching coach says all the time in coaching meetings and recruiting meetings in a lot of places, it doesn't matter how good our plan is if our athletes aren't on board. And on board doesn't necessarily mean they're bought into what we're doing, because I feel like being able to implement different data-driven practices it's hard to argue with the facts. But it also means making sure that our athletes are on board, and that's kind of reflecting what Nelly was talking about jargon. If we're speaking Spanish to them and they don't understand looking at these reports what any of this means, or they don't know what that means when they're out on the mound actually trying to work on some of this stuff, then we're in a tough situation. So to combat that, I'm talking about different types of technology. This is another system that we have that we use when our athletes are on the mound. So they're able to see this high-speed footage of them releasing the baseball. They're able to look at the data directly after the pitch and see if they're attaining the results that we want. They're able to feel that. They're able to have the coach's feedback. And hopefully by tying in all of these different types of technology compared with what we're doing from a coaching aspect and the research we've done before, hopefully one of these things clicks with them so we can continue to move forward in our development practices. I'm going to dive into a couple other examples. I'm going to go kind of quickly through these. So if anything piques your interest and you want to talk about, like I said in the beginning, we can go back through anything and ask questions as well. But here's some other examples of different reports we've put together that are provided to our athletes on a consistent basis. This is the hitter side of our post-action reports. And pretty much what this is showing is each of the athletes at bats, the different outcomes. And one thing that I like it for is we're able to say, all right, this pitch right here was called a strike, although it was out of the zone. Our athlete in that moment may think, I held off on that one. It wasn't a strike. And that's something we think is important, is being able to know and control the zone. Well, being able to come back to this report afterwards and see, all right, you were right, is going to be better for that athlete's long-term success than them questioning, was that in, was that out? And just provide some more feedback for them to continue on their path of development. Another thing we use data a ton for at baseball is some of our advanced scouting reports. And here are a couple examples of our opposing hitter and our opposing pitcher reports. We spend all fall working on trying to develop our players, put them in the best position they can be to succeed. That's our off season. Once we get into the spring, being able to continue to use some of these data practices to expose some of our opponent's weaknesses is also beneficial. And for each guy, this is something that the coaches all know. This is something that we may talk about in some of our team's meetings, but it's also important to us to have these printed out in the dugout so that the guys who rely on this information, the guys who really like this and learn with this stuff, are able to reference for their own sake during games. The last example I have here is something thinking a little bit outside the box. We have a lot of stuff that helps us in competition, helps our guys get better, but instead of just analyzing what our players do and what our opponents' players are doing, we also have put together a little umpire report, which is showing basically what are the umpires' tendencies in our game, because that's something that affects the outcome of the game. So being able to see that these red dots are called strikes, which again are outside of our strike zone, are being consistently called out here. Next time we see that umpire, we know that we can attack that area as our pitchers and we need to fight it off as our hitters. So being able to kind of think outside the box in different ways we can use this as well, I think is pretty important. Moving on, I've talked about like a lot of our high level reports and our expensive technology that we use, but going back to a couple weeks ago on this talk, we talked about Power BI and different ways that can be implemented, but just using the resources we all have available to us through Penn State. Nelly actually helped me put this together and inspired me to kind of dive into different ways that we can think about helping some of our athletes who are remote training currently and being able to stay in touch with them. But pretty much to break down this system is everybody's kind of familiar with putting together an office form. That can be automatically downloaded into a file saved on OneDrive, which can then be uploaded into Power BI, which is pretty much just like Excel on steroids. If you haven't been able to dive into that, I'd highly recommend it. And that's kind of what I'm going to dive into this next slide is if you're someone who feels like you're pretty comfortable in Excel and looking for something that can kind of make your life easier, I'd really, really recommend looking into Power BI. I'm no expert, but I linked a couple resources here that you can go to. And I know that Nelly helped me learn a ton, and I'd be willing to sit down and chat with anybody about the limited things I've been able to do with it. But it's incredibly beneficial because it's free to us, first off. Second off, it's really intuitive and easy to use. And you can share it pretty easily with your coaching staff, with your players, and be able to kind of, like we said, it's important to us to track progress over time, and being able to use different information like that to see that dashboard updating in live time is beneficial, especially to our guys that we can't see every day. Moving on to kind of getting close to wrapping this thing up is I've talked about the high level reports. I've talked about the different technology, but everybody's got to start somewhere. I don't know where you may fall around the learning curve, but I thought it's beneficial for me to kind of take a step backwards and talk about here's what it was in the beginning compared to what we're doing now. And in the beginning, when I first started looking at all this data, I was just handed a big Excel file that is spit out after every game. It has 74 data points for every single pitch, 300 plus pitches in a game over multiple games. I was just absolutely lost. So I wanted to start small, and we looked at one project for one athlete. What makes this one pitcher's pitch good and what makes it bad? We dove into the data, figuring out what are some indicators of success and what are some indicators of doing poorly, specifically for this pitcher's pitch on the mound. And after we were able to dive through that and define really what that means, we then brought it to the coaching staff and said, all right, how can we implement this? How can we train to do more of the good and less of the bad? And for me, that was really a good process of just learning what all of this information means and diving into it at the smallest level, and then being able to reproduce that information in a beneficial way and teach somebody else how it can implement that to get them better. From there, after we learned all the information, after we began to implement it and saw some success doing so, how can we scale that one project and make it a little bit bigger? How can we affect everybody else on the team's pitches? What makes them good? What makes them bad? And this turned into making some custom reports that kind of tracked all that stuff for us, which was primarily in Excel. There's some people that I've worked with who are better at, using different coding softwares. And then for me now, definitely diving into Power BI as well. But it also can be stuff as easy as handwriting on a chart and being able to just track that information over time. That's kind of the key thing for me, is just tracking as much information as possible, even if you're not applying it on a day-to-day basis, to be able to reference those changes over time. Once we were able to scale that to the whole team, it's getting better at it and getting into the rhythm of doing that stuff, we spent a lot of time copying and pasting and changing different things in Excel. Well, how can you make that process a little easier on you? And that's just creating better systems to allow you to spend more time doing other things, whether that's learning for your next project, being more available for whatever it may be. But also, it doesn't have to necessarily just be systems in terms of getting better at a skill in Excel or Power BI or learning something new like that. It's also kind of evaluating the resources that you have currently available to you and reevaluating how you do it now and how it can be done easier. And from there, it's just repeat the cycle, figuring out, all right, we have gone through this cycle to get one pitcher's pitch better. Well, how can we apply what we've learned to our hitters? How can we take this a step further to evaluate what situations we may want to implement this stuff in game? It's kind of a big cycle, but I thought it was important to take a step back and talk about starting small before we get into all of the different intense projects that we've talked about over the past couple weeks. And diving into what I'm talking about here with systems too, one thing that's huge for me, and this is because when I was an undergrad, I was a student manager, is just really using the student population to your advantage. Being able to think outside the box and using like different ways you can use your student managers, something I'd really highly suggest at least taking a second thought about. For us at baseball, this is something I implemented last year that obviously got cut off a little bit, but we have, I think 12 right now student managers, and we probably will be hiring more once we're back into the swing of more regular life. But one way that we use our we kind of split them up into 4 different roles. Your on-field manager is your typical student manager. We have an administrative manager who helps kind of in our office work, aids with camps and recruiting. But then the different ones that I think are incredibly valuable to specifically our data-driven practices is our video and scouting managers, who are specifically there to help operate technology at practice. And that's taking time off my hands from having to set up equipment, from taking video, from tracking data during practice. They also aid in the creation of the scouting reports. They do a lot of the footwork there. And then the other group that does a ton with this stuff is just our data analysts. And I was able to connect with a sabermetrics club on campus that already did baseball analytics work. And they were able to hop in, and they know more about coding. They know more about Excel. They know more about Power BI than me. So being able to lean on them and bring them into some of the systems was incredibly beneficial, I believe, for our entire team. So kind of to wrap it up, like I said at the end of one of the first slides, data also isn't the end all be all. It is a very important and powerful tool to helping our athletes reach their goals. But it also, like Nelly was saying in the beginning, all of this is all about our athletes. And they are all people, so figuring out what works best for each person is important. But that's kind of the gist of what I want to share with you guys all today. I included my email, my cell right there. If you guys want to chat afterwards about any of this stuff, feel free to reach out. But that's kind of what I have prepared today. And hopefully something that I talked about today would inspire you to kind of think about what you guys are doing currently a little bit differently. But yeah, open to any questions if you guys have anything too.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I actually do. Jake, just going back to the KPIs, how do you guys determine what you don't have to, just for a specific position, or whether it's pitcher or any field player, like how do you guys determine those?
Yeah, so for our KPIs, for a couple different things, obviously we have, like I talked about the example of that in the weight room, we do different mobility screening to determine what's important for, like, say, for example, our pitchers. Our athletic trainer will go through all of that work and say, all right, here is, like, you are deficient in this mobility region. That'll be integrated into their pre-throwing work. In terms of talking about kind of our player development strategies, a lot of that is kind of going back to the small projects that I did in the beginning, where it was like, all right, what makes this pitch good and what makes it bad? And being able to track, for example, if we're talking about pitch design for our guys, there are certain movement profiles for each pitch that are good and that are bad, and we can compare that against kind of their previous results. So being able to spend a couple bullpens for our guys, watching them throw their pitches and tracking that information, we're able to compare kind of what their strengths are compared to what their weaknesses are, compared to the past data that we've had. Another thing that we do, just because there is so much data in baseball. Another beneficial aspect for that is we may compare certain pitcher profiles to big league pitcher profiles. So we have the same exact information just from the big league level. So if we have a guy and his arm slot, his body shape, and all of that kind of replicates what somebody who's doing it at the highest level does, but maybe his slider moves a little bit differently or he uses a pitch a little bit less than him, we can kind of compare and contrast, not necessarily identically, but we can gain inspiration from looking at how they do it as well. So there are a couple different avenues, and it kind of, I mean, the unsatisfactory answer is it depends, but like there are so many different situations that we analyze that test in the beginning, and spending time really just collecting data over the first few weeks of our fall pay dividends as we go through the duration of this process.
Any questions? I got one, Jake. So you mentioned one time you have a report that you give to the guys, like a after action review, whether it's on the offensive or defensive side. Can you talk a little bit? I think it's really important as we talk about educating athletes, especially those that may go to the next level or those that may become moms and dads and teach their kids, that they do understand some of this. So what are kind of some of the strategies you go about teaching your guys about what that information means to them, and how do you do that?
Yeah, I think the way that we really tackle this is in the beginning, we kind of make it personal. So we are able to print out those reports after every single outing on our game mound, and being able to say our guys oftentimes will come up to watch video with our coaching staff after their report, or after the day after their outing. We'll have all those reports printed out, so they'll be able to pick those up, and while they're watching video, a lot of times they'll ask questions about different things that are on the report. The other thing too is talking about jargon. A lot of the stuff that we talk about on those reports may not be something that the athletes had ever heard of before. So making sure kind of up front, we're just literally going through like definitions, like talking about, all right, here's our report, here's what this section means. And making sure that's a full team meeting where we're just talking through, here are the different points that you all need to understand, just so that when I'm talking about this in the bullpen, when we're practicing it, it's not just going right over athletes' heads as well. So I think that, yeah, that's a big thing is we have that report and it's always being printed out. So they always they'll get familiar with seeing a lot of the same things, but being able to, in the beginning, really take time to say, this is what these different things mean. And as we get deeper into it, like I said, each kind of area may be an area of focus for a different athlete, whether that's, hey, you haven't been throwing pitches, like you haven't been throwing a lot of strikes lately, so let's really focus on getting this percentage up of pitches in the zone, or different movement profiles or release points. There are a bunch of different areas that guys will tend to focus more in on as we get further, and that's just because each guy needs work in different areas too.
No, that makes sense. I like that. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Hey, so it is 12:30, just as a checkpoint. We'd like to keep it at 30 minutes. We'll keep this open for a second, but feel free to hop off at this point, 30 minutes. Again, I'm going to leave this open, but want to challenge people that may be hopping off here. We talked about jargon. We talked about it has its place. It's efficient. It's our language within our group. We just got to be careful that, just like Jake was talking about, that we're intentional with our language. When we're teaching, we need to be educators, and on the field, on the ice, in the weight room, whatever it may be intentional with your language. The next two performance schools, the next one will be October 21st. We actually have Samir Sapri. He's right here. Samir, if you want to say what's up, man.
How's it going, guys?
So Samir is the VP of the Sports Analytics Club here at Penn State. I think he and Jake have worked together a little bit in the past too, so it'll kind of be an extension of today. And then November 4th, we're going to have Nick Yonko from Nutrition hop on with us. So we're going a lot of different angles. If anybody wants to ever be a part of this, lead a part of discussion, go through an article, the door's wide open. We want this to be fellowship and getting people together and just jamming out over lunch. But really appreciate everybody being here. we'll leave this open if other people have questions for Jake. And if you got to hop off, thank you for coming. Appreciate you guys.
Josh, can you say those dates one more time?
Yes. So basically, it's every other week.
Okay.
It'll be October 21st and then November 4th. And I've had a couple of people ask me to send out a calendar invite. I've been reluctant just because I didn't want to jam up everybody's calendars. I can certainly do that if you want. I've put everybody on this distribution list, and I don't want to jam up some of the big timers up top, schedule. So if you want that, I can send it out individually for you, but we'll go every other week at noon.
I want to say thank you to Jake. But can we get a copy of what he presented today, just to kind of keep the conversation in our head?
Sure. Do you feel comfortable with that, Jake?
Yeah, for sure.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
I'll send the link of the video as well, Coach.
And what was Samir associated with? A club?
Samir, do you want to hop in and tell him exactly your role?
Yeah, for sure. So I am part of a student club at Penn State. It's called the Sports Analytics Club. It's very similar to what Jake mentioned with the Sabermetrics Club. We have sort of like, I should say like the Sports Analytics Club is like sort of the main like overarching, obviously like analytic club. And then Sabermetrics is like sort of a extension of that, focusing on baseball. But we have different groups, basically like interest groups that are focused more on like football, basketball, baseball. We even have some like tennis. I think there's UFC as well. But yeah, it's just basically like student-run organization, just trying to have fun with some of the public sports data that's available.
Well,
So, yeah.
thanks, Samir. We're working to get our Triton wear up, which is I'm in swimming, and
Okay.
we have some hardware that we put on the swimmers that collects a number of different, from an analytics standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe at some point in time we could catch up and see if you guys might be interested in doing something with the sport of swimming.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that would be awesome. And I know like people in our club would definitely have fun with that. So yeah, we're definitely interested in working with
Guys,
them.
could you send out Samir's contact information?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Of course.
Does anybody have any other questions for Jake or any other thing we'd like to talk about?
I'm jumping
I-
off. Josh, thank you. Jake, awesome job. See you guys.
Thanks, Steve. Good to see you.
I had a quick question for Jake, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what is the process like if you're trying to, I guess, integrate new technology, whether that be like new equipment, new types of software, and how might that affect the new information you're relating to athletes or coaches?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because it was something that so this is my second year at Penn State. So my first year at Penn State, all of the stuff I was bringing in was completely new. So kind of tying that back to what I really thought was important is I had a lot of beliefs on the different reports and the different things we should be working on. And not all of that was not necessarily conflicting, but directly in line with the goals that the coaching staff already had. So for me, it was super important to say, all right, like I said on one of the slides, like what are our coaches' individual goals? What is the most beneficial to our players, and something that's already been integrated into their careers? I mean, seniors have been doing it for 4 years. So how can we track the things that we already value and the coaching staff already valued before I began integrating this data? Was a great place to start. As we bring in more and more stuff and different ideas, I think the biggest thing is just to communicate early and often why it's important, why we're doing it, and what the goals of tracking or what the goals of making any changes are as well. We try and do a lot of, I mean, this is the stuff that I love. So this is the stuff that I'm constantly trying to find new and different ways that we can begin to bring new ideas to our players as well. And there's always a ton more research going on different aspects that may be important. So, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just communicating and saying this is important and this is why, and making sure everybody's on the same page throughout the process and it aligns with the goals of what the entire team is focused on as a whole.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nelly, just two things I wanted to just throw out there for the group. They're not questions, but more like just sound bites, I guess. You look at November 4th, this hasn't gone out in an email, but it's going to go out this afternoon. That could be a great professional development day because that morning from 8 to 10, we're going to be running the next roundtable on the facilitating conversations and the appreciative inquiry. So hopefully that fits for a lot of folks. The other thing, which is related to my second point, when you looked at the books that you put up earlier, another book that's really helpful with respect to the language that we use in coaching is called The Coaching Habit. It is not about jargon and it's not even written for athletic coaches. It's for people that engage in coaching others, which could be a much larger umbrella. The way they approach language and the way that they use it to use questioning as a way of instruction is, I found to be pretty helpful. So it's not nearly as deep as what you put up there, but it's some pretty good stuff.
That's a great resource. I'll add that to this and send it out with the group. Hey, question. Does it help if we move that to the weekend or the week after? Because these are just random dates, like just kind of recurrent. We can move that.
Yeah,
If that
I
helps.
don't think so. I mean, that you got two different time frames in there. We went based on the people that were super eager to jump in and went with their availability and then kind of invite anybody else in. We may have a second date as well on the second. That's kind of a backup plan that we're not going to advertise yet. So I would not change anything. I think it's actually really helpful to have the predictability of the every other week with you. And then, if folks can't attend ours, we'll find another day as well. But, I think one of the things that I've really appreciated whenever we can get into a routine of something, then you can plan everything else around it.
Yeah, I agree with that. We haven't had a lot of routine in the last 6 to 8 months, it seems. It's nice. So, okay. Well, if no one else has any questions, we'll hop off here. Please reach out to people, talk. If you got ideas, if there's somebody on campus that we want to have on here that, would be pretty awesome. That's kind of the goal of this is we want to get people with different, expertise areas to come and share, and then we can all jam out and we can all use that and resource that. And this is about a learning group. So please give us feedback and let us know, but thank you guys.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jay.
Josh. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you, Jake. Thanks, everyone.